Sorry it took so long for me to make a reply. I've been a bit busy. I'm going to recover some of the points I made in comments and make some small changes since I have more than 500 characters to explain. Some random comments on your video. The stream of thought style makes following specific points hard. I had a hard time finding the points and support in the randomness. Just making a bullet point list of the topics beforehand should help you make much cleaner replies. Some clarifications where you have my point of view wrong. I never claim that we have to have a state. This is not true. It's possible that at some point the state will become obsolete and die. My claim is that the state does exist, that it is not as simple as just government. If you look at any point in human history, there has always been some form of state. The current forms of state are not the end game. They will change. The forms of state are always changing. There may be a time when the state becomes obsolete and dies. There's just very fundamental changes that have to happen to us as people for this to happen. Advocating anti-statism now is along the lines of advocating not eating, because someday we may evolve into beings of pure energy that no longer require food. Not eating will not get us there any faster. The is-ought gap that you talked about. This is one of the big communication problems that we have. You keep describing what could be. I keep describing what is. I shoot down your idea for what could be because it can't be right now. You try and shoot down my descriptions of what is because it's far from the ideal of what could be. It's very frustrating for me to be told I'm wrong. The grass in my yard is not green because the grass in Alpha Centauri is blue. I imagine you have similar frustration in saying that the grass could be blue. I keep pointing to the grass on my lawn and going, nope, it's green. Now to making new points. The entire anti-state argument is based on bad definitions. It's getting to these definitions and explaining the flaws that I can show the theism of free markets. Wikipedia defines free markets as minimal government interference. I am all for this definition and this type of free markets. It is workable. It is a good definition. I would argue for a much larger state than many as minimal interference, but that's a completely different argument. This definition does not work for an anti-state position because the definition presupposes the existence of a state-run government. I have a bit of a dilemma on how to present this next part. There's two intertwined definitions. And keep in mind, these definitions are in the context of anti-statist free markets, not a description of what is or a workable definition outside of this construct. First, the definition of state. In a stateless society, you're not talking about just getting rid of government, but all forms of state. So let's look at what a state is so that we can understand how far we have to go. A state is an organization. As an organization, and not a physical entity itself, it cannot perform any actions. It only has the ability to authorize the actions. The actions that it authorizes are what sets a state apart from other organizations. It is force and fraud. That is a workable definition of state for an anti-statist argument. Any organization that uses force or fraud. So let's look at some organizations to see if they fit this definition. Cub Scouts authorizes land use for small children to go camping. This isn't force or fraud, it's just something. Government hires people to shoot at other people, then tells them it's for their own good. This is both force and fraud. Book clubs. They make recommendations for books to read and people to discuss these books with. there's no force or fraud. Religion. Obey my God and give me money, or suffer some bad things I made up to scare you. This is definitely fraud. Organized crime. Hires people to shoot at other people. Gives drugs to people so that they can extort money from them in the future. It's both force and fraud. Private defense firms. Well, they hire people to shoot at other people. That is definitely authorizing the use of force. Pollution-generating industries. They dump toxins into the air and water that kill people. It may not be hiring people to shoot other people, but is sure hiring people to kill other people, whether it's intended or not. Now, the definition of free market in a stateless society. A free market in a stateless society is one with no state interference, no organization that authorizes the use of force or fraud. Crimes of passion and theft could still occur in a stateless society and free market, so long as these actions were not authorized by a third party, no organized crime. The short definition of no force or fraud was for the 500 character limit. I support government not because it's a good thing, but because it is the least destructive of the forms of state. I have the most control over it. If you look at when and where some of the other forms of state have taken over, you'll agree. When religion replaces government as the primary state, you have the Middle East, with suicide bombers and Sharia law. Islam has replaced government as the primary form of state. In Europe, you had the Dark Ages, where you were burned at the stake, or worse, for saying things like, "The world is round." Science slid a few hundred years backwards under the rule of Christianity. I would much prefer government. If you look at places like Venezuela, Somalia, and other backwards countries, organized crime has taken over many of them. You have bands of armed men wandering around, raping and pillaging without restraint. I truly fear what it would look like if corporations took over as the primary state. And this is really what you're pushing for when you're arguing free markets today. I hope you can see the magical Skydaddy of free markets now. That the argument that if we get rid of government, all forms of state will simply go away by the magical, invisible hand of free markets. It's childish, magical thinking. What creates the state and/or free market is basic human action, not some convoluted system that we use to try and keep states in check with. Since this conversation started with stateless defense, I hope you see how ridiculous that idea is. Simply put, any need for defense means that an organization is authorizing the use of force, and you do not have a stateless society. This transition to free market statelessness can only happen as a whole, not with separate groups or nations.